Morning.
Okay, good morning. Tell me when we're ready to start.
Oh, Bante, good morning.
Good morning.
Just give me one more minute. I need to connect to YouTube. Bante, good morning.
Good morning.
Just give me one more minute. I need to connect to. Okay, Bante, we are ready.
Okay. Okay, so we are going to begin the meditation this morning. And so take your accustomed meditation position. And today I'm going to do an experiment doing the elements meditation. And this will be rather difficult because what I find is that to do the elements meditation, one has to do usually, in my case, before taking up the elements meditation, to do at least half of a day preparation by doing something like mindfulness of breathing in order to calm the mind down and to collect the power of concentration. But we'll do this just as an experiment. If it doesn't really work for you, don't worry about it too much, but we'll just see how we can manage with it. Okay, but first we'll settle the mind for a few minutes, with first being attentive to the general form of the body, and then settle in on the breaths, and we'll do a few minutes of mindfulness of breathing. Okay, now we're going to aim at first contemplating the earth element. We're going to focus on the earth element's dominant characteristic, which is that of hardness or solidity. And this is a contemplation of the earth element within the body itself, not the external earth element. And so first we want to get a clear impression of the characteristic of hardness or solidity. And so the way we could do this is by touching parts of the body that are clearly hard and solid. So what you could do is to clack your teeth together, or even use your hand to touch the teeth. And to tap against the tooth. Or you can press against the top of the head. Feel the hardness of the skull. Just rub it to get the impression of hardness, solidity, resistance to pressure. Or you could rub the elbow where you feel the hardness of the bone. So choose any of those areas, whichever one stands out most clearly to you, and just focus in on this property of hardness, hardness, hardness. Okay, now we're going to move more systematically through parts of the body. And here we're trying to get the impression of hardness. So you could take the hands and put them to the top of the head and press against the top of the skull. And you feel the hardness of the skull there. And just keep on focusing on that property, that impression of hardness, solidity, resistance to pressure. Okay, then you might focus a little lower on the cheekbones. Again, seeking out that impression of hardness and solidity. And coming down to the jaw, jawbone. Seeking the property of hardness, solidity. You can move across the whole jaw, Then you could come down the neck bones at the back. You get hardness, that impression, hardness and solidity, even to the shoulder bones. Then come to the wrists. Elbows, each elbow, or you could try two simultaneously. And it's somewhat difficult, unless you are an accomplished yogi, to feel the back, the upper back. But you could come down to the buttocks, where these are, I guess, the bones of the pelvis. Or you could come to the hips, hip bones. Again, get the impression of hardness, solidity there. Then through the buttocks, you get the impression of the, I guess, the seat of the pelvis. Again, looking for just the characteristic of hardness and solidity. And come to the knees, and you can press against the knees, get the feeling of hardness and solidity. And then to the ankles. And then press the feet to get the sense of hardness and solidity. So you're actually touching each of these parts with your hands to get the tactile sensation of hardness, solidity. Okay, now come back to your regular meditation position. And then focus the mind first with a few cycles of mindful in and out breathing. And now, without touching with your hands, keeping your hands on your lap, but through your bodily sense, we're going to go through the body in segments, seeking out the characteristic of hardness or solidity. So first, take the head as a whole and just try to feel out the sense that there's hardness, solidity throughout the entire head, even in the cheeks, which are soft, relatively soft, but there's still this element of hardness or solidity everywhere in the head. So pay close attention and try to pick up that sense of hardness, solidity. If you need to remind yourself of the sensation, you could press the teeth together. And then extend that sense of hardness or solidity to the entire head. Then move to the neck and seek out the sense of solidity in the neck, even though the neck is mostly soft tissue, but the earth element pervades even the soft tissue. So sense out the hardness or solidity in the neck. Now move the attention to the shoulders. Maybe start with the right shoulder. Feel hardness, solidity in the shoulder. Then from the right shoulder, move to the upper right arm. Feel the hardness, solidity in the right arm, the upper arm. You could just keep on attending to it, using the code word hardness, hardness, or solid, solid. And the sensation of hardness should emerge. But if it doesn't, don't worry, because often it takes repeated practice over extended time to capture the feeling of solidity. Then put the attention on the elbow. Seek the feeling of solidity, of hardness at the elbow. Then go to the lower right arm. Then the right hand. Feeling hardness, solidity in the hand. Even down through the fingers. Then go up to the left shoulder. And from the shoulder to the upper left arm. Left elbow. The lower arm. Just let the attention rest on that segment of the body, seeking hardness, solidity. Then to the left hand, including the fingers. Then come to the chest. Just observe that region, seeking the felt sensation of hardness, solidity in the chest. Then move to the abdomen. experiencing the hardness or solidity of the abdominal muscles. Then you can move to the hips, taking first the right hip, then the left hip, you could actually move back and forth between them to increase the impression of solidity. Then move to the buttocks, touching the seat. Right buttock, left buttock, and you'll feel hardness or solidity of the buttock of bone, the bones and the flesh of the buttock. Now we'll move down the legs. First, the right leg. Feel the thigh, hardness, solidity of the thigh, the right thigh. Then the right knee without touching it, but just using your mental perception, focus on that area and feel the hardness of the knee. Then to the lower portion of the right leg. And feel the right ankle, hard and solid. Then the right foot, including the toes. Then up to the left hip. Then from the hip to the left thigh. Seeking out the hardness, solidity, even though the thigh is soft, but there's the element of hardness or solidity there. Then to the left knee. The lower left leg. The left ankle. Just fix your mind on that region, seeking hardness, solidity. Then down to the left foot, from the soles to the toes, or from the heel to the soles to the toes. Okay, now come back to the felt sense of the body as a whole, focusing on the aspect of hardness or solidity of the body. And now try quickly scanning through the body from the top of the head, just sweeping down through the face, neck, always just focusing on the characteristic of hardness, solidity in these regions. The down, sweeping down the head, the face, neck, shoulders, and sweeping both arms simultaneously, focusing hardness, down to the hands, then up to the neck again, sweeping through the torso, Again, looking for the sensations of hardness, solidity. Then to the region of the hips and the buttocks. And then sweeping down both legs simultaneously to the feet. Just looking for hardness, solidity, solidity. You could do the sweep a few times, 2 or 3 times, just quickly sweeping through. Then back to the felt sense of the body as a whole, focusing on that hardness, solidity, recognizing or designating that as earth element of the body. Okay, now a few deep breaths. In breath, out breath. In, out. In, out. And then you can slowly and mindfully open your eyes. And again, end the session by rubbing the palms together and rubbing the palms against the face, top of the head, back of the neck. And then to rub the buttocks to stimulate the circulation. And then the knees and the feet. Okay, so that was just the observation or contemplation of the earth element. Ideally, if one has a lot of time, then one could bring in, well, next one would bring in the heat or fire element, then the wind element, and we take the water element, which is the subtlest, to bring that in last. Okay, so let us see where we are. Okay, so we are about ready to begin the lecture session for this morning. First, I just want to get a little water. Okay, are we ready to start?
Yes, Bante.
Okay, so this is lecture number 5, and this is Sunday morning, September 6th at 10 a.m. And so we'll begin with the verse of homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. And we are now going to continue our journey through the stages of insight knowledge. And last evening, we took the section on the comprehension by groups, which aims to take all of the different groupings of phenomena, and we're focusing of the different groupings to make it simple and easy. We're giving prominence to the scheme of the 5 aggregates, and we're aiming to see within the 5 aggregates the characteristics of impermanence, dukkha, and non-self. And in the stage of comprehension by groups, this is done in a general way to generalize these 3 characteristics to all phenomena of the 5 aggregates, past, present, and future. But now we're going to start the actual stages of insight knowledge, which begins with the knowledge of rise and fall. Let me get the general map of the path. Integrated. Just to see where we are right now. So we are in the full understanding by investigation, and we've done the comprehension by groups. And now we're going to start the what is called the tender knowledge of rise and fall. And we have not yet come to the 5th purification, purification by knowledge and vision of what is the path and not the path. That will come.
Good morning, Bante. I just want to make sure you want to share. You are ready to share your screen.
Yes, thank you for reminding me. Okay. Okay, so we are not yet at the 5th purification, the knowledge and vision of path and not path. So, but we're in the full understanding by investigation, and we've already completed comprehension by groups. And now we enter upon the first real stage of insight knowledge, which is the knowledge of rise and fall. But this is in the tender or beginning elementary stage of the knowledge of rise and fall. And that will lead us up to the purification by knowledge and vision of what is the path and not the path. Okay, so let us now go back to the root text. So here we have the Visuddhimagga, and again, as I explained several times, the Visuddhimagga goes into so much detail, almost overwhelming detail. And what I'm trying to do is to clear away a lot of the overgrowth in this presentation, and to clear the straight path, just taking out the main points in the Visuddhimagga system of explanation. Okay, so now he says, having purified his knowledge in this way by abandoning perceptions of permanence and so on, he passes on from comprehension knowledge and begins the task of attaining the contemplation of rise and fall. And then he gives the definition from the Patisambhidamagga, understanding of contemplating the change of presently existent states, of presently existing dhammas. So contemplating that change is knowledge of contemplation of rise and fall. And then comes the elaboration. How is it that understanding of contemplating present states change is knowledge of contemplation of rise and fall? So present materiality is born, the characteristic of its generation or production, or let's say its arising, is rise. The characteristic of its change is fall, and the contemplation is knowledge. And the same with feeling, perception, formations, consciousness, and so on. So that is from the Patisambhidamagga. Now the commentator here is explaining, in accordance with the method of this text, he sees the characteristic of, I'll use the word production, birth, arising, the aspect of renewal of the material form that arises, that is the rise. And he sees its characteristic of change, its destruction, its dissolution as fall. And let's take the Pali words here. Because I don't really like so much the word fall. I mean, the combination rise and fall, it sounds nice, but it gives the impression that there is a kind of stable, lasting entity that gradually rises up, then gradually descends and falls away. Whereas the process of rise and fall is actually much quicker, much more almost instantaneous than that of a gradual arise, like a wave arising and falling down. It's not like that, but it's more of things just flashing into being and then vanishing. So the Pali word or expression is udayabhaya, which is a combination or compound of udaya plus vaya. And you can see that both are based on the stem aya, which means going, and ud gives a sense of going up, and the v represents vi, which gives a sense of going away, vanishing or disappearance. So we could say udayabhaya is origination and vanishing, arising and vanishing. So that's why the text explains what is meant by rise is the production or birth, the origination of the phenomena, and the fall is its destruction, its dissolution. Yeah, and then this is important in contemplating rise and fall, that one understands that there is no heap or store of unarisen mentality and materiality existing prior to its arising. So when any, let us take a material phenomenon, arises, it does not come from some stored up heap of material phenomena. So let us take we'll take a cell arising in the body. It isn't coming from some stored up heap of cells, but the cell arises, and then when it ceases, it does not go anywhere, but it vanishes. Maybe the cell is not a good example. Anyway, we'll just let us just read on. Okay, so that there is nowhere any depository in the way of a heap or store or hoard of what has ceased. And then it uses the example, this is a good example, of when somebody is playing a lute, and then the lute gives off a sound, a note, a particular note. So that note doesn't come from any stored up sort of depository where there's accumulation of notes. And then when you strike the lute, that note comes from the storage place into apparent existence. But rather, when you strike the string of the lute, the sound arises. And then when the sound ceases, it doesn't go anywhere, but it just vanishes and stops. So the sound of the lute is brought into being because of conditions, because of the lute itself, the neck, the strings, and the player's effort. So that when you strike the string, the note arises. When the note has finished, the sound is finished, it completely disappears. It doesn't come from anywhere. It doesn't go anywhere. So in the same way, all material and mental phenomena previously, before they arise, they are non-existent. They come into being and they exist just momentarily. And then having been, having existed, they then vanish. They vanish into nowhere. Okay, then the text goes on to explain two ways in which one contemplates arising and vanishing, rise and fall. According to condition and according to instant. And so it gives this explanation. He sees the rise of the aggregate of material form by way of the conditioned arising. This is arising according to condition. Thus, with the arising of ignorance, there's the arising of materiality. With the arising of craving, karma, he sees the rise of the material aggregate in the sense of its conditioned arising thus. Oh, the fourth is with the arising of nutriment, there is the arising of material form. So ignorance, craving, and karma, those are the conditions operating from the past that have brought material form into existence in this life, in this existence. And then nutriment or food, that is the sustaining condition of material form of the body in the present life. So those are four conditions for the arising of material form. But then the fifth is one who sees the characteristic of, I prefer the word production, sees the rise of the material of the aggregate of material form. Okay, so one who sees the rise of the materiality aggregate sees these five characteristics, and then the corresponding statement is made about the seeing the fall or vanishing of the aggregate of material form. So one sees with the cessation of ignorance, there's the cessation of material form, the cessation of craving, cessation of karma, there's the cessation of material form with the ceasing of nutriment. That is, if we don't get any food, then there comes the end of this living body, so the cessation of materiality. And then one who sees the characteristic of change, and by change here is not meant the change of something that is persisting and undergoing changes, but the actual Pali word viparinama means deterioration, vanishing, or disappearance. One sees the fall of the material aggregate. And then the same is said with regard to the other aggregate, the other aggregates. It's just that one of the conditions is different in each case. Now, having gone into this elaboration of seeing rise and fall by way of condition and by way of instant, I have to express some reservation about this exposition, because it's clear that when you're actually observing material form in the present, one is not able to see the operation of conditionality. One is not observing ignorance, craving, and karma from the past, producing material form in the present. One is not even seeing food or nutriment sustaining material form in the present. But when one is actually doing the contemplation, the focus is really on seeing the characteristic of production or arising in the case of material form. And so maybe to take an example, so if one is doing the walking meditation, so with each step, one is seeing the material form in that step come into being. And with each phase of each step, when lifting the foot, one is seeing the material form in the act of lifting come into being. When the lifting or picking up stage ends, one sees the cessation of the material form in the lifting stage. When bringing the foot forward, one sees the production of the material form in the stage of putting the foot forward. And when the putting the foot forward comes to an end, one sees the material form in that stage comes to an end. When putting the foot down, one sees the material form of that stage coming into being. And with the end of putting the foot down, one sees the material form in that stage comes to an end. Similarly, when doing mindfulness of breathing in the mode of insight, when breathing in, one is seeing material form come into being during the stage of the in-breathing, and then come to an end with the end of the in-breath. And then when one is breathing out, one is seeing material form originate in the stage of breathing out and come to an end with the end of the out-breath. And also not only material form, but in each of these stages, one is seeing arising together the feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness coming into being and vanishing. And as the attention becomes more refined, one is able to see the production and disappearance or cessation at increasingly subtler and faster levels. I sometimes compare this. I remember when I was a child, I got as a birthday present a microscope. Probably they still have them today with different levels of magnification. So I think we had like 100 times, 300 times, and 500 times. And so we take a certain specimen, put it under the microscope, and then we look first at 100 times magnification, and then one sees certain structures and formations magnified 100 times. Then one increases the magnification to 100 times, to 300 times, and then other forms and structures which you don't see at 100 times become apparent. And yet those were always there when you were looking at it at 100 times magnification. But it's just that the focus of the microscope was not sharp enough to make them apparent. And then one increases the focus to 500 times, and then still more structures and formations appear. And so one is seeing what looks to the naked eye like a solid, undifferentiated object, like a leaf of a plant, the leaf of a plant. When you see it 100 times, you start to see the cells that make up the leaf. 300 times, one sees certain structures inside the cell. At 500 times magnification, one sees the subtler structures within those general structures. And so similarly, as mindfulness and concentration become increasingly stronger, one starts to see the arising and passing away at increasingly subtler levels. And this is happening from moment to moment, from instant to instant. Okay, so this applies to all 5 of the aggregates. Okay, so altogether, if you take arising by way of conditionality, and then the momentary arising and falling, so we have 50 characteristics, that is 10 in the case of each aggregate. So in this way, one gives attention and detail according to condition and according to instant or moment. But as I explained, generally in the way of the instruction of the meditation masters, at least the way I've learned, the emphasis is always on observing the arising and falling by way of the momentary, at each moment, the production and falling away of bodily and mental phenomena. And so it's said it's only at the instant of arising that there is the characteristic of production, and only at the instant of dissolution or vanishing that there is the characteristic of change. Okay, and then this passage brings out how the Four Noble Truths are beginning to become evident to the meditator by contemplating rise and fall. So it said that the truth of origination becomes evident through seeing rise according to condition. So one sees how the phenomena of the 5 aggregates arise through ignorance, craving, karma, and then each through its own condition. Then the truth of suffering becomes evident through the discovery of the suffering due to birth or production. So one sees when the 5 aggregates come into being, moment by moment, there's a kind of dukkha inevitably bound up with those 5 aggregates. And then the truth of cessation becomes evident through seeing the fall or passing away with the cessation of the conditions. And then here it says the truth of suffering becomes evident again through seeing the suffering due to death or to passing away. So when it's starting to get some, and then the truth of the path becomes apparent by recognizing that this contemplation of rise and fall is the mundane path to the ending of delusion, of ignorance. It's not yet the world transcending path, which will come later, but one sees that this contemplation of rise and fall is the initial stage of that liberating path. Similarly, through seeing conditions, dependent origination starts to become evident. So we're skipping over some of the details. Now the three characteristics start to become more apparent as well. And I like to start here with the characteristic of impermanence. So this becomes evident because one is seeing arising and passing away, occurring instant by instant. And so one sees that each thing, each phenomena, before it arises, it doesn't exist. Then it springs into existence through conditions. It persists for just a brief moment, and then it vanishes. And when it vanishes, it passes out of existence. So one sees the non-existent, the non-existence after having been. So things come into existence and go out of existence. That's the characteristic of impermanence. And then the characteristic of dukkha starts to become evident through the discovery of oppression by rise and fall. That is, one is seeing how there's this constant process of rising and passing away without any essence or core to it. So it's just this burden of having to endure this uninterrupted flow or sequence of phenomena coming into being and passing out of existence, coming into being and passing out of existence. And then the characteristic of anatta or non-self becomes evident through seeing that arising and falling occur through conditions. It's not through an act of will that one can bring things into existence, or through an act of will let things pass out of existence, but phenomena arise and pass away through conditions and dependence on conditions. And so one has no mastery over this process. Nyanamoli translated that word as no curiosity, which I don't like. I would say no autonomy. One doesn't have the ability to control this process of phenomena according to one's will. So one can determine, let my form be thus, let it not be thus, and so on. It doesn't mean that we don't have any ability to change things through our will, but we don't have this absolute mastery over things. So to use the example I used yesterday, I think I want to remain young forever. I want to be healthy forever. I want to be beautiful. I want to experience only beautiful and blissful sensations. I want to see only beautiful sights. I want to be strong in will and to be able to accomplish whatever I intend, but I don't have that mastery over these five aggregates. And so the five aggregates are not self. So that starts to become apparent. Okay, and then to illustrate the way things appear in the knowledge of arising and vanishing, So the text brings in some similes drawn from the suttas. One sees that they are short-lived, just like dewdrops at sunrise, like a bubble on the surface of a water, like a line drawn on water, like a mustard seed placed on the tip of a needle, like a flash of lightning. So these are all illustrating the aspect of impermanence. Then to illustrate the characteristic of non-self, they appear without core, like a magical trick, like a mirage, like a dream, like a circle created by swirling a firebrand, or like a what's called a goblin city, like the froth on the surface of water, like a with if you have the froth that seems like a solid mass, but if you take it with your hand and crush your hands together, the froth just vanishes. And like the plant, like the trunk of a banana tree. So the banana tree, the trunk does not have any solid core, but it's just coil enfolding coil enfolding coil. Okay, so this is reaching the initial stage of insight knowledge. It's the first stage in contemplation of rise and fall. Okay, maybe at this point we can take some questions before we go on to the next stage. So I see Olivia first.
Good morning, Bhikkhu Bodhi. So I can understand for myself that just one listening is not going to get, the complete understanding of what's happening. But, and one has to move it from conceptualizing it and then to direct experience. But at this stage, you gave us a nice example of walking, where you said that at each stage, in a granular and discrete manner, we need to see the end of one stage and the beginning of the other.
Yeah.
And I understand from that what you mean is that we're looking at the production and the vanishing of the act. Now, what I'd like to know is, in the case of intention or volition, which is also subject to condition, this is also going to get produced and vanish, and vanish. And I know in the Rahula Sutta, the Buddha told Rahula to monitor and manage each step of the way. But I was wondering if you could give us an example of how volition is managed and monitored within an activity or activities in general.
In general, or in the process of doing the walking meditation?
In general, because that's where we get, that's where I'm just about trying to figure out how to add intention to the walking meditation process, which is a little easier because it is physical and mental. But I think when we're in a mental world alone, the intention just seems to run, and I'm not sure how it offsets this continuous dynamic, changing, transferring process that's happening in the background.
Yeah. Well, I would say that in doing the actual contemplation, to see the arising and vanishing of the volition or the intention is easiest to do this in the context of formal meditation practice. So let us say one has been doing the sitting meditation, and then the period has come to an end and one wants to begin the walking meditation. Okay, so then one forms the intention. I want to rise. I'm going to get up. Okay, then to get up, maybe for an older person like me, one has to press the hand against the ground. So one forms the intention, the volition, pressing the hand on the ground. And one notes that volition arise and pass. And then one goes to the physical act of putting the hand on the ground and pressing on the ground. Then one is lifting the body. So at first one forms the volition, lift the body, then one lifts the body, then bring the body into the standing position, the volition, one notes that, and then one notes the body coming into the standing position. Then one forms a volition, go to the walking path. So one
Okay.
forms that volition, then one goes to the walking path, then one forms the volition, start walking, then one takes the first step, and then with each phase of each step, a volition arises. And when the mindfulness and concentration are very strong, in each phase, one will be noting the volition to take that phase of the step, and then the actual act of taking that step. So in that way, one will be attending to the entire process of walking by way of volition and the physical act of walking, noting the arising and vanishing of the volition and the arising and vanishing of the bodily processes involved in the act of walking. So when it gets experience in that way, then one can extend that contemplation to other activities. I have to say, it's very difficult to do in one's ordinary everyday life. And I'm not going to hold myself up as a model for that. But in the context of a retreat, say, when it's mealtime, maybe you'll hear a gong strike, then you will be attending hearing, and you know that means the meal is ready. So then you have the volition arises, go to the dining hall. So you note that volition, and then you start walking to the dining hall. And to get to the dining hall, you wouldn't be breaking the step up into little phases, but you'll just be having the volition to walk, and taking the steps. Then when one goes to one's seat, one has the volition, go to your seat, arrive at the seat, the volition, sit, then you sit down. Then when you take the food, the volition to take the food up, say take a spoon of the food, put it to the mouth, then the volition, open the mouth, then your physical act of opening, put the spoon in the mouth, and then you do that. Then the volition, take the food into the mouth, then the volition of chewing, chew, the volition of swallowing, swallow, and so on. So those are just some examples of how volition, you could be attentive to volition in the course of one's regular activities. Is that
Okay. That's good, Bigabody. I guess I'd have to start in slow motion, really slow, and then as the concentration builds, to be able to move a little faster.
Yeah, usually one would start in slow motion, but as one becomes familiar with the process, then one can move closer to a normal speed while still be aware of volitions.
Okay, thank you very much, Bigabody.
Okay, we have Kenneth.
Good morning, Bhante.
Good morning.
Bhante, I have a question from the meditation on material this morning, material form that we did. If one flexes a muscle, does that mean that the solid form, the primary material, you're changing it with your volition? Because you feel hardness on a flexed muscle and not so when it's not flexed. So are you using your volition to actually change the element?
I'm not quite sure that I understand the question.
So if you have a muscle, say your bicep, and it's soft when you do it, But if you flex that muscle with intention, you say, I'm going to flex my muscle,
Yeah.
it becomes hard.
Yeah.
So does that mean that with your intention, one can actually change the primary element in that?
Yeah, in a certain way, you could say yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Bhante. I was just wondering about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Phyllis Lee.
Good morning, Bhante.
Morning.
I have a question about observing the rise and fall of our consciousness.
Yeah.
Because I was always understood consciousness that it is a kind of an underlying faculty that's always there, like awareness.
Yeah.
So how do we actually observe the rise and fall of this awareness?
Yeah, actually, the consciousness is the subtlest of the five aggregates, so it's the most difficult to observe. But let us say, generally, I would say that one sees the arising and falling of consciousness through the arising and passing of the mental factors associated with the consciousness. So let us say, okay, I'm sitting in meditation, and then a car goes by and the driver is honking the horn. So I hear the sound of the horn. So in this case, a consciousness arises. I'm attending to the breath. So the consciousness is fixed onto the breath, in, out, in, out. Then comes the sound of the horn, honking, honking, honking. So then there will come, I will attend to hearing, hearing, hearing. And so I know that there is the ear consciousness has arisen, which is hearing the sound. So in one way, I could be attending to the sound coming in to existence and vanishing, arising and falling of the sound. But instead, I could reflexively observe the arising and falling away of that ear consciousness, which is hearing the sound. And then when the sound has passed away, when the sound has stopped, then I can bring the mind back to the in and out breathing, and that will be through the touch sensation of the breath coming in and out. And so even though the focus might be on the touch sensation, but I could, to catch the consciousness, I can turn back and observe the awareness of the touch sensation of the breath coming in and out. And in that way, I'm aware of consciousness. Similarly, when thoughts arise in the mind, at one level, I could become aware of the content of the thought, remembering this, remembering that, hoping for this, hoping for that. But alternatively, or maybe immediately afterwards, after noting the content of the thought, I become aware that there was a consciousness, a mental event that was entertaining that thought, and that has arisen and passed away. So that way one is noting the arising and passing of the consciousness. And then what can be done, and this is rather difficult, but at a more advanced level, one could turn the beam of attention back onto the mind itself and just note the arising and passing, the rapid arising and passing of consciousness itself without putting any particular focus on the content of the consciousness. But that is something done that's rather difficult to do.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, Chi. Maybe I think I have to continue now with the discussion. So please, you could save your questions for a later time. Of course, we want to finish a certain amount of material in today's session. Okay, so I'm going to have to move on now. So now we have the meditator who is now deeply immersed in contemplating the arising and vanishing of phenomena. And at this point, it's said that there are certain things occur, certain phenomena occur in the course of contemplation, which are called, here Nyanamoli has translated the 10 imperfections of insight. But the word that's used, the expression that's used is vipassana upakilesa. And it might be better to translate here upakilesa as defilements, 10 defilements of insight. And so it said that these imperfections of insight do not arise in a noble disciple who has already reached the penetration of the Four Noble Truths. And they don't arise in persons who are not meditating, who are lazy and negligent, but they arise only in the meditator who is on the right course and who is practicing diligently and continuously, but still relative beginner of insight. So what are the 10 imperfections? So here he lists them, but we're going to go through them one by one. And this is said to be, according to the commentary, if you remember, there were 4 approaches to practice mentioned by Venerable Ananda in Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Fours, Sutta 170. So this is the way the commentary explains the 4th way, which is the mind is seized by agitation about higher states. So it said that when the meditator is bringing phenomena to mind, contemplating these phenomena as impermanent, illumination arises in him. And then he turns to that illumination and thinks, this is a quality of the noble ones. And so he thinks that he's reached some noble attainment, and that is said to be a distraction due to agitation. And so when his mind is seized by that agitation, he does not understand correctly the appearance of things as impermanent. He doesn't understand correctly their appearance as dukkha. He does not understand their appearance as not self. Okay, but let us go to the actual explanation of the 10 imperfections or the 10 corruptions of insight. Okay, so the first is illumination. Yeah, so what happens as the meditator reaches a certain level of insight concentration, the mind is absorbed in the samadhi while one is contemplating the arising and passing of phenomena with insight. And then a illumination appears, a kind of light appears, first surrounding the body, and then it can even spread through the room or even further. And so the text says here that the illumination arises in one monk, illuminating only as much as the seat he is sitting on. Another, the light might spread through the room. In another, it might even spread beyond the room to the environment of the place where he's meditating. In the case of another, the light might appear throughout the whole monastery or even further. I don't know how he would know that it spread this far. In another, it arises from the surface of the earth up to the Brahma world. In any case, because of the power of samadhi and of insight, this light emerges from the body of the meditator, and he thinks, because of this light, that I must have reached some stage of enlightenment, so I am maybe a stream enterer or a once returner, a non-returner, even an arahat. But this is a wrong grasp of this phenomena that arises just as a kind of consequence of the process of contemplation. But through mistaken understanding, one grasps upon that light as a sign that one has reached a stage of realization, a stage of true attainment. According to the subcommentary, one adverts, turns to that light, taking it to be nibbana, or to take it as a sign that one has reached the path or the fruition. Okay, in the case of another meditator, or the second defilement, very strong, powerful knowledge arises, the knowledge due to insight. And so the knowledge becomes very keen, incisive, very sharp, like a lightning flash. Okay, then various kinds of stages of rapture and bliss arise, flooding and inundating the body. And then the mind becomes extremely tranquil, very peaceful, light, malleable, wieldy, sharp and straight. And then feelings of bliss arise, flooding the body. And then one's determination, one's resolution becomes very strong. One's energy becomes so powerful that one doesn't even have to sleep, but one could just continue meditating almost through the night, or even maybe getting 2 hours of sleep or enough. One has so much energy. And then the mindfulness becomes extremely well established. And so whatever subject one turns to, gives attention to, it immediately appears to the mind. And then the mind becomes very balanced, full of this equanimity, neutral, detached, observant, but detached, this wonderful stage of equanimity. So those are 9 corruptions of insight, but it's really the 10th. And those are let's say that these are wonderful experiences in themselves, but where they become corruptions or defilements of insight is because of the 10th. The 10th is the attachment through craving and misinterpretation. And so what happens when these wonderful phenomena appear is that one becomes attached to them, one clings to them, and one misinterprets those phenomena as signs that one has reached some world transcending attainment. And through that attachment, the mind becomes clouded, and one is not able to recognize that this attachment is a defilement, and it turns all of the others phenomena that arise into corruptions or defilements. So if you have knowledge, if the insight is very sharp and clear, that's excellent in itself. When the rapture arises, if one can just experience it without attachment, wonderful. If the mind is very tranquil through the insight, again, wonderful experience. So with the bliss, with the determination, with the energy, with the sharp and well-established mindfulness, and with the equanimity, all of those on their own are excellent achievements. But what distorts them and turns them into detours leading away from the correct path is the attachment to them and the misinterpretation of them as signs that one has made a genuine breakthrough. And so this is what makes them into corruptions indicated in this section. So as in the case of illumination, so in the case of the other corruptions, the meditator thinks this knowledge, rapture, tranquility, bliss, and so on, never arose in me before I have surely attained the path, attained fruition. And so when that occurs, he is taking what is not the path to be the path, and what is not fruition to be fruition. And then when he takes what is not the path to be the path, and what is not the fruit to be the fruit, then the progress of his insight is interrupted. He drops the continuity of insight contemplation. He discards the basic meditation subject and just sits there enjoying this experience with an underlying attachment. So the light appears illuminating the room, and so one assumes, now I've reached attainment. So one stops contemplating arising and passing away, and instead one just enjoys that splendid, beautiful, radiant light lighting up the whole room. Or one indulges those feelings of rapture and bliss. When the mind becomes very tranquil, one enjoys that tranquility. And in this way, one discards the meditation practice and fails to make progress. And so it's like I think actually this is the important sentence here, that the first 9 phenomena are called imperfections or corruptions because of the basis for defilement or corruption. In themselves, they're not corruptions or defilements, but as I said, they're wonderful phenomena that naturally manifest in the course of contemplation, but they become corruptions when they're grasped upon with attachment. And it's the attachment that is itself both a defilement or corruption and a basis for further corruption or defilement. And then these phenomena become the basis for defilement. It says, because you could take them in 3 ways, each one in 3 ways. One can take them, misinterpret them through a wrong view. So this is when one interprets, say, the illumination or the bliss or the rapture, that this is the attainment of the path. This is the experience of the fruit. So that is a wrong view. But then they can also be a basis for pride or conceit. One thinks, how great I am in that I've reached these wonderful, magnificent experiences. And then when one maybe is in a meeting with the other monks, one thinks, I've reached these wonderful experiences, but one sees some of the other monks are sitting in a rather sloppy way and carrying on unmindfully. and one thinks, they are worthless, useless, unmindful, but I am the one who has reached these wonderful stages, so that they become a basis for conceit, and then one simply enjoys them and clings to them, and in that way they become the basis for craving. So one relishes, one enjoys them and delights in them. So in that way they support craving. So they become the basis for wrong view, for conceit, and for craving. And so now he's interpreting these wonderful phenomena that arise, taking them to be mine, I, and myself. And once one falls into that way of responding to the corruptions of insight, and one clings to them and continues to relish and enjoy them, then one has taken what is not the path to be the path. And in that way, one gets led astray from the correct path of insight. But now now the text is going to show us how one distinguishes the wrong path from the right path and returns to the right path. So this is section 126. So it says that when illumination, that's the light, and other phenomena arise, the skillful meditator who has this discretion defines and examines it with understanding thus: this illumination and so forth has arisen. It is something that's impermanent, conditioned, conditionally arisen, subject to destruction, to fall, to fading away, to cessation. Or so he's seeing it by way of conditionality and impermanence, or else he views it through the lens of non-self. So he says that this is non-self. I have no power or absolute mastery over it. It's impermanent in that it disappears after having been, and it is dukkha in that it is subject to arising and falling away, oppression by arising and falling away. And so whenever any of these wonderful phenomena manifest, one contemplates them either in terms of conditionality or simply as impermanent, dukkha, and non-self. And in that way, one breaks the attachment to them. And so the text continues, he unravels this 30-fold skein of imperfections. That is, we have the 10 corruptions of insight, which can be grasped upon as being my, I, and myself. And that way they become 30-fold. Well, one takes them, one grasps upon them with wrong view, conceit, and craving. Again, in that way they become 30-fold. But the skillful meditator unravels them, recognizes that they are conditioned, impermanent, dukkha, non-self. And in that way, he distinguishes what is the real path from what is not the path. So he considers that these states consisting in illumination and so forth, that is not the path, but it is insight, knowledge, free from these corruptions, that is the path. And so this is purification by knowledge and vision of what is the path and what is not the path. That is the knowledge that becomes established in the meditator by coming to know this is not the path, that is clinging to these wonderful phenomena. And that is the path, that is continuing to contemplate material and mental phenomena by way of impermanence, dukkha, and non-self. Okay, so that now takes us through the stage of purification by knowledge and vision of what is the path and what is not the path. And so now, in terms of our progress through this outline, we've now passed through purification by knowledge and vision of what is the path and what is not the path, which we can see as rejecting the 10 corruptions of insight as the path. And then I should add here, and adhering to the contemplation of anicca, dukkha, anatta. Okay, now we can go back to take questions. Let's see, we should have had some questions from the previous round. If I didn't answer your questions, you still have them. You could put your hand up, but I'll begin by taking Simon.
Yes, Bante. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, my question is that it just say that when the materiality or the mentality vanish, there's no store. Once it vanished, there's no store.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how the karma will work if nothing is stored.
That's actually an interesting question, because in the explanation of how karma operates, one of the expressions used is that karma has been done and stored up. Yeah, so in a way, I don't really know how to answer that, but I would just say that maybe the principle is that when a volitional action is done and it creates some karma, that karma is stored up. Maybe we could say the idea of being stored up is metaphorical. It's not that there is a particular physical place where the karma is preserved and kept till it's time to bring its results. But we would say that when a karma has been created, it has a potential to produce its results when it meets the suitable conditions. But literally, the karma is not stored any place in any kind of hidden secret place, where if you find that place, you can discover, like buried in the ground, all of one's accumulated karmas, and then one could just eradicate them, like discovering the nest of termites or something. But just when the karma is done, until it produces its fruits, it always has this potential to produce the fruits, but it's not literally stored any place.
Thank you.
Okay, that's the best I could do. Okay, we take Ed, and you can unmute yourself.
There we go. Thank you, Bante. Many of these first 9 of the 10 appear to be jhana factors. And
Many of these what?
jhana factors.
Yeah.
Jhana factors. And they're pretty much presented in the order that the jhana factors are.
Oh, I see. Amongst the corruptions of insight.
Yes. And I remember Bante Ji used to warn against what he called false jhana.
Yeah.
And I wonder, I mean, I just reflected that, having been a victim of that, I wonder if this is what he was really talking about, becoming obsessed with the achievements of jhana as you're a beginning meditator. I mean, people talk about it, then you become attached to it. And pretty soon it becomes jhana rather than the purposes of the jhana sequence. It's kind of an interesting reflection for me, and I wondered if you could call this false jhana. That is the jhana to which one becomes attached, the idea, the image of jhana.
Except that these phenomena at this particular point are not arising through the practice of samatha or tranquility meditation aimed at the jhanas, but similar states arise in the course of insight contemplation because of the power of samadhi, the power of concentration. But it's not a concentration aimed at the jhanas, but these are phenomena arising because of the clarity and the sharpness of the insight into the arising and passing of phenomena. So they're similar, well, let's say by name, they're the same as or some of them are the same as the jhana factors, but this is not a practice of a jhana practice, but this is an insight practice in which these states arise.
And that's why I call him maybe false jhana, or Bhante G called it false jhana. But I can remember the attachment, and I know a lot of people in my householders' lives who aspire to a Buddhist path of some sort,
Yeah.
who focus on jhana because it gets a lot of press and a lot of, and so you focus on it. That's mine, that I want this, which you'd say is irrational, and it's true. But I think it's a trap into which people, and certainly I fell.
Okay, I think we have to move on in the questions because there are other people who have questions. Yeah, I always have to ask people to keep the questions short and concise so that everybody gets their chance. Now I think I've lost the list. Okay, Chi?
Bhante, yesterday you mentioned a verse which is phenomena alone flow on,
Yeah,
cause and component they are conditioned.
yeah.
Can you explain more on the component, where it came from, the Pali word?
Then I'd have to go searching back into the Pali text, and that will take time.
Okay, I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Phyllis?
Hi, Bante. I wonder if there's a reason why up till this point we keep encountering the phrase not self as opposed to non-self. Because they do mean slightly different things, don't they?
No, this is just a matter of translation. But the Pali word is always the same. The expression is always the same, anatta. I translate non-self.
And they all means whatever element we're talking about having no solid, non-changing self, correct?
Exactly, yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Dayani? Oh, let me ask you to unmute. Okay, Dayani?
Yes, Bante. I would like to ask about defunct karma.
Yeah, I'm getting an echo when you speak, and then it's clouding out your original voice. I don't know what.
Yeah, it's moment. Let me close this one. Okay. How is it, Bante, now?
Okay, now it's better.
Yeah. So we're talking about just now about there is no stories for karma, but it would be fruitful based on the conditions.
Right, yeah.
How about defunct karma, Bante, if you can explain more about this?
How about the what?
Defunct karma.
Defunct karma.
Yeah.
Yeah, defunct karma, that means that there are certain kinds of karma that if it's going to ripen, it has to ripen in a particular lifetime. You say for this lifetime, or it has to ripen in the next lifetime. And if it doesn't meet suitable conditions, then it doesn't ripen at all. Then it becomes defunct. Yeah, that's what's meant by defunct karma.
Okay, thank you very much, Bante.
Okay, Renita?
Hello, Bante. Can you hear me?
Your voice is a little faint.
Okay, can you hear me? Is it better?
Let me increase my volume. Okay, go ahead. Try again.
Yes. Is it
Okay.
clear?
Okay, I could hear you. Yeah.
Thank you, Bhante. A question also about volition. So is volition, my understanding, is also driven by karma, correct?
I wouldn't say volition is driven by karma. Rather, what we say is that it's volition that creates karma.
So if volition is also one of the mental factors, so what you are saying then, volition is outside of karma, rather it produces karma. Basically my question is, if volition is also one of the mental factors, which is also maybe, I don't know, driven by karmic forces, then how can one ever come out of karma?
No, volition is not, I would never say that volition is driven by karmic forces.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that past karma will determine certain aspects about my life and the conditions that encompass my life. And so I'm limited by those conditions that are produced by past karma, but it doesn't mean that I'm absolutely determined by those conditions and that I can never come out from the bondage of karma.
Mm-hmm. So then volition is outside of karma.
No, I would not say volition is outside of karma. What I say is that volition is not, our present volition is not determined by past karma. And our volition creates karma. The circumstances and conditions of our life are largely determined by past karma. And so it's within those circumstances and under those conditions that I live and form my decisions and determine my future. But all of that comes about through the operation of karma in the present, and then through exerting my karma in the appropriate way. And that is particularly in applying the karma to the development of the Noble Eightfold Path, then I'm able to eradicate the defilements that keep me in bondage to the cycle of karma and its result. And then I break free from the bondage or the chains of karma.
Mm-hmm. So then
Yeah.
I'm still not clear then where does volition come from?
It's just an inherent, it's not that it comes from someplace, it's just an inherent function or faculty of the mind, capacity of the mind.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, Sud.
Thank you, Bhante, for taking my question. So going back to the same volition question. So volition to be engaged in, dhammic practices like meditation or maybe just listening to, coming here and listening to this Dhamma versus volition to, let's say, I don't know, engage in sensual desires, something else. I mean, there's definitely a difference in these volitions.
Yeah.
So what is really affecting them? Is that previous circumstances from the karma or what exactly? It's just not clear.
I mean, why does one person have the
volition to come here to listen to something like this versus a volition to, let's say, engage in sensual desires, I don't know, drink and drive versus something else,
I say that there are multiplicity of factors. One would be one's past conditioning from past lives. So that establishes certain habitual formations, certain dispositions. And then it would be the influence of the environment, influence of friends, one's own life experiences can, in certain person, open them up to, say, to seeking the Dharma. So there are a variety of explanatory factors. It's not one single thing.
I see. Thank you so much.
So maybe this is why the Buddha emphasizes so strongly the importance of establishing good friendship, a friendship with the good people, because it's through the influence of good, and also in Actually, we find some answers to this in the famous Mangala Sutta, Patirupa Desavasocha. So being born into a suitable locality, a good environment. So if you're born, say, into, let's say, a country where you have no access to the Dhamma at all, maybe, let's say, Saudi Arabia, even though now I have some Saudi people who are living in the US who are learning the Dhamma. But if one is born in that country where almost exposure to any other religion is prohibited, you don't get to learn the Dhamma. So that would not be a suitable locality. So Patirupa Desavasocha, Pube Chikata Punyata. So merit done from the past, merit coming from the past. So that would create a disposition towards a wholesome life. And then Sapurisa Sevana, associating with good people, with with kind, compassionate, and wise people who will guide one on the right path. Okay, so those are some of the disposing factors. Okay, at this point, we're going to have to break for the lunch, and then we will come back. Let's see the schedule. So you'll come back for your breakout groups at 1:30, and then at 2:30 to 3, then I will take questions that emerge from the breakout groups, and then we'll continue with our survey or overview of the Buddhist path, the path of insight, in the afternoon, starting at 3 o'clock. Okay, so thank you all for your attention, and we'll see you in the afternoon.
Thank you, Bante.
Okay.
Thank you, Bante.
Okay, so I'm going to leave now.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.